You're sitting with someone. The conversation pauses. No one speaks. Suddenly, your brain panics. You feel pressure to say something, anything, just to break the quiet. Your heart rate picks up slightly. You become hyper-aware of every second that passes. You start scanning for topics, mentally grasping for something to fill the void. But why? Why does silence feel so uncomfortable, even when nothing is wrong? Why does a simple pause in conversation trigger such an urgent need to speak? The other person might be perfectly content. They might be thinking, or processing, or simply resting in the moment. But your nervous system is treating the silence like a threat, like something that needs to be fixed immediately before it gets worse. Today, we're going to explore why silence feels so loaded, so charged with tension, and why the discomfort you feel says more about your brain's ancient wiring than it does about the actual moment you're in. For most of human history, silence wasn't peaceful. It meant something was watching, something was hiding, something was wrong. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. For our ancestors, ambient noise was information. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the movement of small animals. These sounds created a baseline of safety. They meant the environment was normal, predictable, alive with ordinary activity. But when everything went silent, that was a warning. Prey animals go quiet when a predator is near. The forest stops making noise before danger strikes. Sudden silence meant something had disrupted the natural order, and that something was often a threat. Your brain still treats unexpected silence as a signal, not consciously, instinctively. Even though you're sitting in a coffee shop or living room, not the African savanna, your amygdala hasn't updated its threat detection software. It's still pattern matching against ancient templates of danger. Silence removes feedback, and your brain hates missing signals. In any social interaction, your brain is constantly gathering data, tone of voice, facial expressions, words, timing. All of these inputs help you assess whether you're safe, whether you're accepted, whether the interaction is going well. Speech provides constant reassurance. We're still connected, we're still engaged, everything is okay. But when speech stops, that data stream stops. Your brain suddenly loses its primary source of social information. And in the absence of clear signals, it does what it's designed to do. It assumes something might be wrong. And because you can't consciously override this ancient alarm system, the discomfort feels automatic, undeniable, and urgent, even when the logical part of your brain knows there's nothing actually wrong. In conversation, silence creates ambiguity, and ambiguity is where anxiety lives. When someone stops talking, your brain immediately starts asking questions. Are they bored? Are they upset? Are they judging me? Did I say something wrong? Are they waiting for me to speak? Are they uncomfortable? Without verbal confirmation, your brain assumes responsibility. It decides that the silence is a problem, and more specifically, that it's your problem to solve. This is a cognitive bias called the spotlight effect, the tendency to overestimate how much other people are thinking about you. When a silence occurs, you assume the other person is focused on you, evaluating you, waiting for you to do something. In reality, they might be thinking about their grocery list, or they might simply be comfortable with quiet. But your brain doesn't wait for evidence. It fills in the blanks, and it almost always fills them in negatively. So it tries to fix the discomfort by filling the space, even if the silence wasn't a problem until you noticed it. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The silence itself is neutral, but the moment you interpret it as awkward, your body language changes. You tense up, you start fidgeting, you break eye contact, and now the other person picks up on your discomfort, and suddenly the silence actually does feel awkward, not because it was, but because you made it so. The tragedy is that this fear of silence often prevents the very connection you're trying to create, because real intimacy, real comfort with another person, includes the ability to be quiet together, to not feel like you have to perform or fill every moment with content. But you can't get there if you're constantly running from silence. Most conversations aren't about connection, they're about regulation. This might sound cynical, but it's not. It's just an honest look at what a lot of social interaction actually is. We speak to reassure each other that everything is okay, that we're engaged, that we're present, that we're maintaining our roles in the social contract. Speech is a form of social grooming, the human equivalent of what primates do when they pick through each other's fur. It's not always about the content, it's about the act itself, the maintenance of the bond, the signal that we're still in this together. Silence removes that reassurance, and suddenly you feel exposed. Without the protective buffer of words, you become aware of yourself in a different way. You notice your breathing. You notice where your hands are. You become conscious of being perceived without the distraction of speech to hide behind. This is why silence feels more vulnerable than talking. When you're speaking, you have some control over how you're perceived. You can shape the narrative, steer the conversation, project a version of yourself that feels safe. But in silence, you're just there, unmediated, undefended. For people who use conversation as a way to manage anxiety, and that's most people, silence removes their primary coping mechanism. Suddenly, they're sitting with discomfort, and they can't talk their way out of it. Performance stops, and what's left is the raw presence of two people in a room with nothing to hide behind. And so you scramble to fill it, often with something that doesn't even need to be said. You make small talk that neither of you cares about. You ask questions you don't really want answered. You perform interest you don't actually feel, all to avoid the discomfort of letting the moment be what it is. When you're alone, silence can feel calm, restorative even. You can sit with a book or stare out a window, or simply exist without the pressure to produce anything. The quiet feels like relief, but with others, it feels loud. That's because social silence isn't empty, it's interpreted, and interpretation invites anxiety. When you're alone, there's no one to wonder about, no one whose reaction you need to monitor, no one who might be forming judgments about you. The silence is just silence, absence of sound, absence of stimulation. It's neutral, maybe even pleasant, but the moment another person is present, silence transforms. It becomes relational. It's no longer just the absence of sound, it's the absence of communication, and your brain interprets that absence as meaningful. This is why you can sit alone in your apartment for hours in perfect quiet, but 30 seconds of silence on a first date feels excruciating. The silence itself hasn't changed. What's changed is the social context, and with it, the stakes. There's also the fact that silence with others forces a kind of presence that many people find uncomfortable. When you're talking, you're engaged with content, topics, ideas, stories, but in silence, you're engaged with the person themselves. You're aware of their physical presence, their breathing, their body language, and they're aware of yours. Neither approach is wrong. They're just different ways of relating to the space between words. Silence isn't awkward by default. It becomes awkward when someone rushes to escape it. Think about the people you're most comfortable with, your closest friends, your partner, your family members you actually like. What's different about conversations with them? Often, it's that silence doesn't feel like a crisis. You can sit together without talking, and it's fine. There's no pressure to perform, no anxiety about what the quiet means. The silence is just part of the rhythm of being together. That comfort didn't happen by accident. It developed because at some point, you both stopped treating silence like a problem that needed solving. You let it exist. And when you did, something interesting happened. The tension dissolved. The moment deepened. This is the paradox of silence. The more you resist it, the more uncomfortable it becomes. But the more you allow it, the more natural it feels. Because silence isn't actually the problem. Your relationship with silence is the problem. When you allow silence to remain, when you don't rush to fill it with nervous chatter or forced small talk, you give the conversation room to breathe. You give both people permission to think, to process, to simply be present without constantly producing content. And often, what emerges from that silence is more genuine than what comes from the compulsive need to keep talking. After a pause, people often say what they actually wanted to say, rather than what they thought they should say. The silence creates space for truth. The goal isn't to become someone who loves silence or who weaponizes quiet to make others uncomfortable. The goal is simply to stop treating it as a threat, to recognize that pauses are part of the natural rhythm of conversation, and that not every gap needs to be filled immediately. Silence doesn't mean failure. It means nothing is being forced. And sometimes, that's the most honest moment in the room. The next time you feel that familiar panic when a conversation pauses, remember, your discomfort is not evidence that something is wrong. It's evidence that your brain is doing what it was designed to do, scanning for threats, looking for signals, trying to keep you safe. But you don't have to obey that alarm every time it goes off. You can acknowledge it and choose not to react. You can let the silence sit for a moment and see what it actually is, rather than what your anxiety tells you it means. Most of the time, it's just a pause, just a breath, just two people existing in the same space without needing to fill it with noise. And that's not awkward. That's just real. The most connected conversations aren't the ones where no one ever stops talking. They're the ones where silence is allowed to exist without anyone panicking, where quiet moments aren't gaps to be filled, but spaces to be shared. So the next time you're sitting with someone and the conversation stops, try this. Don't speak. Not yet. Just wait. Just breathe. Just notice. You might be surprised by what doesn't happen. The world doesn't end. The relationship doesn't fracture. The other person doesn't judge you. The silence just is. And sometimes that's enough.